In this shorty, I just want to use a mock-up to give a quick tour of the connections used in the steel frame for this building. This is the column base and the anchor bolts. I want you to note that there's no leveling plate on this in this detail. The anchor bolts are embedded in the reinforcing of the concrete. The column is set on the anchor bolts using shims underneath this base plate. The anchor bolts are tightened down against the shim to keep this column vertical and stable during erection. Once the column is stable, then structural grout is packed underneath the column base. This concrete and these anchor bolts need to be certified to the steel erection contractor prior to beginning the erection plan. These anchor bolts are often damaged during the construction process. The steel frame is a moment frame. A moment frame is designed to take loading from side to side or twisting within the frame. So the entire structure is designed to have that kind of lateral support sticking out of the beam. There's another closer view of the stiffener. This side of the plate has another flange similar to this one that sticks out to hold the beam into place. The splice design from column to column is important just to create a continuous vertical member. Splice plates can also be on the inside face of the vertical web of the column. The idea, though, is to keep the two members of the column acting as a single piece, and to resist any possible lateral bending or twisting in the frame. Here again you see the stiffeners. I've left the bolts out this time. Note also I have these center handles in order to slide a bolt into place. But again, this is a flange. This flange is welded directly onto the vertical column in the factory, and these stiffeners were added above and below the flange to create. Here's the top view of that same flange that would be finished off if the column didn't come through, as in the upper floors. Most times the columns will pass through the floor line in order for safety features. Interior columns probably not. This represents some clamps across the upper portion of the column. Those clamps are plumbing clamps in order to rack the column into vertical, and actually the entire frame into alignment. These can also be chokers. Chokers are just steel cables that are tied around the frame. Note that the frame is very heavy, and these connections are all already have bolts in them, and even just wrench tight, they're difficult to move. But it's done. They loosen bolts, tighten bolts, and tighten these cables or loosen those cables in order to rack the frame into position. Once plumbed, then final bolt up occurs. That means all of the temporary bolts are replaced with permanent bolts, and an air impact wrench is brought in to tighten all of the bolts according to some torque value. This is a structural value for the actual twisting. If they tighten too much, then it would threaten actually a failure in the bolt. Obviously too loose would not give you a stiff enough frame. Once the bolts are in place, the clamps are removed. When the clamps are removed, then a field welder will come in and weld all of the connections shown on the engineering drawings. The welding occurs in two directions. In other words, all of the joints are welded, and the reason for that is to prevent this lateral movement. It just stiffens the connection all the more.